On the eve of Russian President Vladimir Putin's state visit to China, we take you to his hometown, St. Petersburg, to walk down the memory lane with his two university professors who helped shape the student who would later become Russia's long-serving leader. And a talk on the soul of Russian culture with the Director General of the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg about the museum's history and one of the museum's biggest fans, Vladimir Putin. Million of them are housed in 6 huge buildings.
This is a solution which are discovered, which are robbed and sold on the black market.
It's the lobby of the law school for St. Petersburg State University.
Первый вопрос, который Дональд Трамп и Владимир Путин.
What kind of class is it?
Это была лекция.
This is the lobby of the law school for St. Petersburg State University. The school is well known over the years for bringing out some of the best talents of the world when it comes to international politics and law, including these two gentlemen, the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the Prime Minister, Mr. Medvedev. I'm here to meet with the Dean of the school to have a look of the history of here and also to talk to some of the professors here who are proud of their students and also have deep views about some of the issues going on in our world today. St. Petersburg State University is the oldest and one of the largest universities in Russia. Its law school is being regarded as the best in the country. I met the dean of the school while in St. Petersburg. He and his students show me to this room full of ancient books of Russian laws throughout history. The school is well known for cultivating some of the biggest names in Russian history. Vladimir Putin is one of those. In 1970, Mr. Putin became a law student at St. Petersburg State University, earning his degree in 1975.
Actually, I graduated from law school in St. Petersburg University, so I could be a legal advisor, a lawyer. However, I worked for national security departments my whole life. I went on to work at the City Hall of St. Petersburg after the intelligence job in the Soviet Union. I truly love those jobs, but in the meantime, I believe I'm also qualified to be a lawyer.
Well, he did not eventually become a lawyer, but one could tell he cherished those days in law school as a young man. I sat down respectfully with two professors who taught Putin when he was a student there. The professors, coming from different generations in Russia, emphasized the different concepts of the law, how they apply to society and the world in the conversations. What about your understanding, Professor? You know, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Russia, the West, the Internet, new technology, ideology, revolution, all these concepts mixed up these days.
Although there are similarities between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, Putin is more secure than Trump because he has more control over the situation, especially in his own country, than Trump does. And sometimes the situation is out of control for President Trump, and that's why he makes those brash decisions, which sometimes catch his closest allies off guard. This is not fitting of a country that is touted as one of the most outstanding world democracies.
What about Putin? You said President Putin has more control of the country in which he is the leader. That means he has to have very good judgment in terms of where the country should be going and what his job should be. What do you think where the country should be going? Is he doing a good job, according to you, who is his professor in university?
Глубокое уважение к Дэн Сяопину.
We can look at the experience of your own country, the People's Republic of China. I respected what Deng Xiaoping did to overcome all the mistakes that had been made. He managed to overcome them while preventing the disintegration of power. Regardless of what people think, I think this sparked China's progress. It's important for our different authorities to understand that real democracy is impossible without strong leadership, because otherwise the power would have weakened and disintegrated. A showman may have even come to power and reverse all the country's progress. A good example is the tragedy of our country in the 1990s. In that decade, we didn't understand that unraveling power leads to tragic consequences. In those years, people like Gorbachev and Yeltsin couldn't grasp this reality. So it's very important to learn our lessons and learn from each other. And I would like to segue to another question touched upon regarding public and private ownership. I think a reasonable combination of them, based on true competition between the two entities, will lead to a healthy society.
But you are Professor TOLSTOY, who is well known in your field.
I don't think that I personally experienced any pressure in this regard. And in 1945, I didn't face any barriers to attend college. In fact, I received scholarship funding for all my studies. Under those tough times, the state took care of me the best that they could. But my family and loved ones experienced all the difficulties that come with establishing a nation. Before the revolution, they held quite liberal views. My grandmother, for instance, unlike me, mastered 5 foreign languages, and she studied in Loisson. She received a monthly allowance from her father, who was quite well off back then. Part of that allowance was donated to political refugees in Switzerland. So I can't deny that some political asylum seekers, like Vladimir Lenin, survived thanks to her hospitality. I used to say that, "Granny, you funded the revolution." She would wear those old-fashioned spectacles and say, "No one could expect the outcome would be like this." And my great-grandfather used to be the manager of the southeastern branch of the Russian railroads. He used to employ young people in the exiled Vladonishka district due to their political views.
What does it take to be a good professor? That among your students, you could have someone who serves as the president of a country, among many of the others who are talented and professional.
So I would say that you need a more thorough and well-rounded education than the one I received when I was young, because a large part of my curriculum was dedicated to the studies of classic Marxism, which is antiquated. So I think true success is a combination of learning traditional methods and new technologies to cope in the world we live in. As I discussed with Vladimir Putin when he paid me a visit, I told him that I was afraid that the soul will be discarded in education and that AI will completely subsume human workers. And that is a danger because humans can build empathy. But what about AI?
Before we go, I think you said at the very beginning of our meeting, it is a mixture of strictness and kindness as a professor.
Yes, to a certain extent, it is. But I would say that we are not limited to this rigidity, because the teacher needs to be versed with the latest advances in science. And I will be frank, I am lagging behind in this regard, and I can't compete with younger teachers. But I feel satisfied as a teacher for their successes.
Professor, you remind me of my grandpa, who's also with a lot of characteristics. Thank you so much. Thank you. The Faculty of Law is one of the oldest faculties of St. Petersburg State University. Vladimir Putin, when he studied there as a student, enjoyed access to different academic approaches and teaching styles, thanks to his teachers, including this professor, who was almost as young as her student then. Is it easy, though, to cultivate the leadership? Is it easy to teach a student such as Vladimir Putin?
Well, I did teach him during my first year of work as a university professor, and Vladimir Putin was a fourth-year student at that time. But I only lectured a seminar class, so it was hard to pick out students. But according to his group mates, he was interested in the subject, and many years later told me as much. But he forgot what grades he got. But I think it was positive.
So that is a fresh teacher experienced the student.
Well, he was quite young because he entered university when he was 17. Because some people tend to enroll after the army, but he did it after school. So he was 21, the youngest in the class, and I was approximately 30. But of course, age is not the subject of discussion here.
No. Not that I would investigate much. You know, when you think about Russia and the future of Russia, do you think his qualities will help the country?
Yes, I do. The latest opinion polls included a question whether you consider Russia to be a great country, and if yes, why? And the majority of the people said yes, because we have such a leader.
One of the things I always want to ask is, as a professor, who are you most proud of? Your student who has already become the president, or your students that are working in different fields, but also trying to make a difference?
Well, I'm proud of all my students because they have always been good to me. But regardless of their achievements, I'm proud of all of them.
I think you're a great teacher, proud of all the students that you have because they're all unique in their different ways. I know you're busy. You were with your student earlier. What kind of class is it?
The first course was on the Marxist theory of state and law. The class was dedicated to human rights guarantees. After the session, we held our scientific amateur circle, where we discussed the future of science within the framework of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.
What does it take, Professor, to be a leader from a law professor like you?
Well, I think in this regard, I can refer to several high-profile scientists. First and foremost, Max Weber was a great sociologist of the 20th century. He discussed different types of leaders that have charm and rationality. I can refer to Confucius as one of two types of decent leaders. The first adheres to the Hay principle, which is about the reconciliation of different ideas. The second is the time principle, which accommodates everything. But I think the best case scenario is the Hay principle.
Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yes. A talk on the soul of Russian culture with the Director General of the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg about the museum's history and one of the museum's biggest fans, Vladimir Putin. Of them are housed in 6 huge buildings.
This is a solution which I discovered which are robbed and sold on the black market.
Is the lobby of the law school for St. Petersburg State University.
Первый вопрос, который Дональд Трамп и Владимир Путин.
What kind of class is it?
Это была лекция понятия.
The degree of a country's love for culture usually demonstrates its quality deep inside the soul. Russia is proud to be home to the State Hermitage Museum, one of the most respected art museums in the world. Made up of 6 buildings, it sits along the banks of the Neva River. At the center of the museum is the Winter Palace, which was originally Peter the Great's winter residence. It's where the rarest collection of the world's treasures are. The State Hermitage Museum is one of the largest museums in the world, housing arts and culture items. 3 million of them are housed in 6 huge buildings around here. Among the collection, painting is the biggest feature. And there are some paintings coming from China. You could see on the wall, for example, coming from the 18th century in China. Some of them are actually from unknown artists throughout Chinese dynasties, but you could see they're being beautifully presented here, and it also reflects the huge interest about China coming from Russia throughout history. From paintings to furnitures, from porcelains to wood carves, even though the collection in the China room of the Hermitage Museum is quite limited, but one could say they're one of the most important resources that Russians would go to when it comes to the Chinese culture. And among the exhibits in the China room, I noticed there is a pair of cranes coming from the 18th century, according to the introduction. Cranes are symbols of longevity and prosperity in Chinese culture. As far as I understand, it is also one of the best and favorable animals of the directors of the museum for generations. The former director of the Hermitage Museum said all he envied are the night watchmen of the museum and also the cranes that are flying to Egypt. Well, jokes put aside, what I'm going to say here is we're going to have an exclusive interview with the director of the State Hermitage Museum, Mr. Mikhail Piotrovsky. And let's listen in what he has to say. Mr. Director, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
I always wonder, as a director of the largest art museums in the world, and an archaeologist yourself, how do you see history?
You know, it's a very important and good question, because the museum gives you a possibility to interpret the history by yourself. The museum is not a book and not a textbook. It doesn't, insist on certain interpretation. We give you possibilities of interpretation. Like an archaeologist, he finds some pieces of building or a sculpture, and then he decides or he imagines how it should look like. And so, to understand the exhibit, we help you, but you must be educated. You must read. In general, the best thing of visiting a museum, you come and look around, then you go and take a book. Oh, today you just take out your computer and look for the names and study, and then you go back and see again, look again at the objects.
100 years ago, it's a big year for Russia and for the rest of the world, of course. And among the exhibits you are having this year, some could be very controversial objects. For example, the bloody shirt of Nicholas II when he was hurt in Japan. So how do you present history? And how do you think people would interpret history through your exhibitions? It's a big question mark.
We choose what we show. And we think it's our right to choose what we show, and we give you people possibility to think about it and to discuss it. We don't insist. And so it could be controversial. It's okay. It must be. Everything is controversial. Art is controversial. So talking about the shirt of Nicholas II, the bloody one, there could be different interpretations. But it is important to show it. Not always. It's not good to show a bloody shirt permanently. But when we have 100 years of him being killed, we can show his blood, but not the blood which was split in Yekaterinburg, but it's not before. You can speak about Japan and relations. You can speak about Russian imperialism, which was planning to conquer this part of the world. You can speak about the revolution. You can speak about the style and fashion of the shirt, how it was built. So many things. And we're happy that we can give people opportunity to think about so many things.
But you're talking about 100 years history thing. What about the recent history? Russia, the former Soviet Union, went through so much. Your people as well. Do we have the guts and the courage to face all the zigzagging in recent history? And as a museum, how do you see that question?
You know, we are in the middle of all this, and we're extremely important. When you have all this turmoil of after Soviet Union was dismantled and collapsed and all the problems, the museum, as a cultural institution, has all museums have shown courage to go on in doing our work and showing the people that with all these big changes, the culture is what stays forever.
On huge occasions, Russia is hosting international events, the Olympic Games and the upcoming World Cup as well. I understand the square right outside the Hermitage is likely to be the celebration place, and that, of course, is going to have an impact on the cultural heritage in the museum. How will that work out eventually, Mr. Director?
Well, we develop different rules. We don't say, well, impossible. We say it's impossible. But there are rules. For instance, when there is a big event on the Palace Square, we measure the strength of the sound, and there's a certain level which agreed upon. If it's upper or low, upper than we agree, we call the company, says, please put it lower, and they do it lower. We forbid this and that. A lot of things are forbidden to be done on the Palace Square on the base of our initiatives. So it helps.
Mr. Director, you are very direct, if I could say. Because in some interviews I even read that you are saying almost more than half of the concerts being held in the square do not worth to be held in St. Petersburg. I mean, you heard the interest of some interest groups, I'm sure, over the years. What does it take to have that gut?
Well, you need a little bit of courage, but you need a lot of diplomacy. You must explain people, and you must also propose the solution, a rule. So we propose the rules. I'm always saying, well, you can have whatever you want on the Palace Square, but it must be like a flash mob. You come and say you do whatever. Don't make the construction going for 10 days and 10 days and 10 days and so on.
There are two layers of things, Mr. Director, if I could ask further. One, of course, is your relationship as a director of one of the most well-known museums in the world with the government. Secondly, is the fact that Russia has been under sanctions over the years. And how is your relationship with the West, particularly when it comes to exchanges of exhibits and also with museums in other parts of the world?
You know, this issue has nothing to do with current situation. Before all the sanctions, we have always been under sanctions. We always demand, when we send an exhibition to any country, we need a very clear guarantee that the objects will come back in time. Now, for many years, we don't have no culture exchange of the exhibition with the United States, because the United States doesn't give us state guarantees of immunity from seizure. They say we have a very good laws. They're good, but it's not enough in today's situation. So we develop and we change the whole system of international legislation. They're doing this. There exist different kinds of immunities which protect art in all the things. It's a result of our activities and fights.
The State Hermitage Museum is such a pride of Russia that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, personally came out and presented the Hermitage with a Fabergé egg to mark the institution's 250th anniversary about 5 years ago. He minced no words in describing his fascination with the museum, like tens of millions of Russians.
It is hard to imagine that 250 years ago, the museum's collection began with 225 paintings bought from abroad by Catherine the Great, and now it houses more than 3 million works. The Hermitage is certainly an attraction for millions of people from our nation and around the world.
World leaders visiting Russia also frequented the Hermitage. German Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2013, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2017, just to name a few. But what about your relations with your government officials? You are named by the Prime Minister. And also you have a person-to-person meeting with the President Putin, for example, last year. So what were discussed in those meetings? And how do you persuade your government top leaders to be able to protect the cultural heritage as much as you cherish it?
Well, different examples. Well, in general, our government of nowadays, and President and Prime Minister, they have been grown up in St. Petersburg.
Yes.
They know Hermitage, so they're prepared.
Is that an easier job for you then?
Well, it's sometimes easier, sometimes not. So, from time to time, just one of the last meetings, I explained to them that we, the culture, needs special legislation. We need special law which gives culture inside the country protection from different kinds of new laws which prohibit this, prohibit that. Our realm must be free of many other rules which exist outside. And the President agreed and said, okay, you say the laws are wrong, prepare the new law and then we'll see. So now we're working on the new law which will protect and give such a...
What's going to be the centerpiece of this new law, as you say?
The centerpiece of this new law will be understanding the culture as a special realm. Culture has its own rules. For instance, you can show naked figures in the museum. You can't show them in the street. And something like this. We can use it also for very serious things like protection of people of culture from different tricks of in the financial things and the financial rules and things like this.
You know, about protection of cultural heritage, of course, what we have just said is important. Another thing, there's a debate going on in the world about where the cultural heritages belong to. As we know, throughout history, there were colonies, there were occupation, invasion, and things like that. Cultural heritage spread around the world through different means. So, as a director of the largest, one of the largest art museums in the world, how do you see that issue?
The art belongs to the people and the art belongs to the world, especially now when the world is global. So the main thing is accessibility. All the objects must be accessible to the people in general. If they're in the museum, it's okay, everybody can see them in the museum. If they're in the place where they have been built, okay, let them stay there. Let's not take them to the museum. But let's not begin to move things from one place to another. One thing is important. Art belongs to everybody, but it's not a property. Don't measure art according to ideas of property, money, then we'll never find a solution. All this collection is presented to the people, and 50 or 60% of the things are considered to be world treasure because they have been brought to a museum and shown in the museum and so on. Greek sculpture was not appreciated before it became, well, put and pronounced in all the museums and Greek sculpture, Greek and Roman sculpture, and other things. Museums make culture real, appreciated by the people. It's very important. We produce this cultural product which must be accessible. For instance, we have built open storage building every year, big open storages where everything which is in the Hermitage is accessible. You can see whatever you want, whatever things. This is a solution. But the things which are found in different places, they must stay there. And every place, every country, including Russia, has a lot of things to do just to protect things which are in the earth, which are discovered, which are robbed and sold on the black market. So this is the field.
Mr. Director, you are an expert of Oriental studies. The Middle Eastern or greater Middle East is exactly your object. How do you see the realities of the region these days, particularly the clashes among religions, among civilizations, some even argue, as an archaeologist yourself?
Well, as archaeologist, I'm certainly trying to help to protect just the cultural objects. Because cultural objects don't only mean the cultural objects, they show you the continuity of civilization there. Because the people, some of the fanatics which are destroying pre-Islamic art, they want to destroy all the connections, cultural connections between the epochs and so on. So we must protect this understanding that the culture is one, the history is one. There is the civilization must be friendly. Different is beautiful. What is the main thing which we try to explain to the people? In general, Middle East is such a special place. There are always fights between civilizations, cultures, and so on. Maybe it's for the whole world it's kind of a laboratorium for fighting and discussing. The biggest problem today, that today's wars are terrible. They're annihilating everything, not like the wars of the Middle Ages and so on. So we have to protect all these conflicts from using the strongest weapons possible, just to make them a little bit sensible, even in their fights.
But Russia, of course, plays a very active role these days, particularly for the issue of Syria, for example. Some would accuse you using the name of culture and cultural protection, in fact, making a political impact there in those regions.
You know, certainly protection of culture has a political impact and must have. Politics must defend culture, like they're defending nature, like they're defending human rights. It's the same story. Sometimes you must use force, and so that's why I mentioned Palmyra, because maybe the choice of Palmyra exactly in the beginning of Russian involvement in Syria was also from the cultural point of view, and it was a good thing. It's not public relations, it's just the opposite.
But should the intellectual take sides in terms of controversy, in terms of wars, in terms of politics? Your thoughts, sir?
I think intellectual must be involved and might be asked, and it's good for us. We don't give orders. We propose different solutions, and somebody has to choose what are the priorities. So we are in a good position, and then we can say, oh, it was a wrong choice. We propose you different ways.
The role of intellectual like you is very interesting in today's world. You earlier in one of your articles argued there has been a loss of intelligentsia in the world. I wonder what you meant in that word, and also in a place as unique as Russia. How does that work?
You know, it's a very important issue, because there was a certain period in the 19th century, beginning of the 20s, when we had intelligentsia, not only in Russia, it is a Russian word, but in all over the world, where the people of the intellectual work, especially teachers, journalists, students and professors of the university, have been considered moral authorities. Nowadays, they're not considered moral authorities. Sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's the fault of the time. Intelligentsia have been people who, because they're intellectuals, they're worse, they've been people with conscience, and it was understood by everybody that if the teacher says something, it is important, not only for the students, for everybody. Professor of the university is something, a writer saying something, you must listen to him more than to general or president or prime ministers. Nowadays it's gone, or partly gone.
You heard a lot of different chaotic voices these days on any issue. The debates go on. But then intellectuals begin to lose their voice because they don't want to involve in some of the nasty debates, particularly those debates that don't make sense to them. But on the other hand, their voice is being lost from then on. How do you see that controversy, that dilemma?
You are right, they are not participating, but they must participate. You know, you are citing my interviews. I am talking about everything about what I know even a little bit. Now we have been 5G, and we've been talking, and I am going to talk very strongly how the digital economy is dangerous for the people, how smart city could be a terrible city. And we're going to talk also, we use technology, we love technology, but so we always try all to speak out and make other people speak out, because we must be critical, but critical in general, intellectual, not just participating in political things. That's another story. Also everybody can do this. But just to be critical in general, you have some ideas which make your people of your world authority to other people.
You have the patience to be critical thinking? You have the courage to be critical thinking?
We have a fantastic museum behind us. That's what we don't, what I'm saying is not just me, it's the museum. Museum where I've grown up here, working here, my father worked here, so I feel that I have this right. These objects they help me to speak.
Mr. Director, one important thing in the world, even though we are globalized, but people argue we are burning our own bridges in terms of connecting with one another. How do you see, as an archaeologist and as a museum director, one of the biggest, once again I emphasize on that, the bridges that our ancestors managed to create, and yet we failed to rebuild?
Certainly we must protect the bridges, and maybe we must to build new bridges permanently, you know? Like, well, if the bridge is from wood, there is a flood, you make a new bridge, maybe in another place. So we must make new bridges, new style of bridges, because museum is exactly a bridge.
You know, the ancient Silk Road, even though it is not literally a bridge, and yet it has served as a cultural bridge among so many different civilizations, kingdoms, people. Today, people wonder whether those glorious times could be revived again, or are we just naive in believing the description of history, thinking it was glorious? Mr. Director.
We're a little bit naive, because certainly there was a glory like our time. There's its own glory, and there is things which are not very glorious. But certainly it shows, it's very important to show us, to make us a little bit humble, because you see that in all these ancient times, the Middle Ages, the globalism was existing already, without all these satellites, and so it was there. People have been connected, they have been knowing each other, they have been bringing things from here to there and there to here, and they knew different cultures. So we must learn from them, and just to be humble to understand we are not better. If we are not better, so let's learn from them how they managed to do this. How did it function? Because it was functioned fantastically, it was good for everybody, and it was a great symbol of things that the world is one world.
If your president, President Putin, who is busy building the Eurasian Economic Community, which is a bridge in a way, or the Chinese President, Xi Jinping, who is working on the Belt and Road Initiative, which is another bridge, not literally, but rather in the idea, ask you for advice coming from ancient civilization. How did they get it right? What would you say, Mr. Director?
You know, the rulers don't like direct advice. I'll advise, please help our museums to make some joint ventures, to do something, because what we are doing is exactly what is your ideas are. The Chinese idea of the Silk Route, the Eurasian idea of Russian government of Putin. That's exactly what we are doing. So help us to develop museums, our exhibitions, things like this. This is the advice. We are the best help for your ideas.
I do have a final set of questions for you, Mr. Director. Both you and your beloved father serve as director of the Hermitage, different generations. Who do you think is doing a better job, Mr. Director? Or shall I put it in the other way? How do you see the different sets of challenges and achievements in different generations?
First of all, certainly my father was doing a better job, and his generation was much better than ours.
Why would you say that?
Because this was a generation of the people who lived in very difficult circumstances, eternal, the international, and so on, and they survived as intellectuals.
The two world wars.
Two world wars, the terrible times in Russia, repressions, political totalitarianism this way and that way, a lot of things, poverty. So they managed to keep the intellectual level, and this, I speak about the whole generation. And that's one thing, but certainly challenges are a little bit different. Well, when I became director, I said, well, my father has no challenge in money for the museum, but there was ideology. Now we have no ideology, but no money. And so. Now
come on, you got a lot of money.
No, we're coming back.
Yeah.
Now we're back. Now we have money, and now we have everybody trying to interfere into museum life to say you must do this, so you must do not, and not only the government the less. People, everybody has its own opinion. Now we have these problems with international relations because, well, we survive, we work, but it certainly is an obstacle. So we have to find solutions for this, which is more or less exactly what was in my father's time.
Have you talked to your father about this earlier?
Well, my father is dead for many years, but I have the feeling I'm sitting in his armchair in his office and so on, so I have a connection with him, and I think he approves, more or less he approves on what we are doing and how we are doing.
There's one planet in the universe that is named after your father and you. They say a planet shines in the universe because it reflects the lights of the others. That's quite a contribution, I would say. How much light would you like to reflect?
It must be very good light, because now with all the changes of lighting systems have different kinds of lights, you know. There is a warm light, there is an intimate light. I'd like a good light which will be a little bit yellow, a little bit green, and not too strong, but beautiful.
And continuing.
And continuing, children.
Mr. Director, what a pleasure seeing you. All the best to you and the museum. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is my exclusive interview with Mikhail Piotrovsky, the director of the State Hermitage Museum. Well, the debate about the source of collection could always be there, and probably for a long time to go. And yet, as long as these antiques are with us, as long as they're being shared, we could always draw inspirations from all of them. And with that, we're coming to the end of today's program. We may leave this place, however, the civilizations will always remain. I'm Tian Wei from St. Petersburg. Bye for now.